Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us, it means you've got that same itch we do, that deep-seated desire to pull apart the threads of history and see exactly how they weave the world we live in right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Today, our mission is to dig into a specific, incredibly intense Wikipedia article detailing the Battle of Château-Thierry in 1918. We're going to extract the most vital nuggets of knowledge from this source, giving you a serious shortcut to being deeply well-informed about a moment that literally saved Paris.
Yeah, fantastic topic to bring to you today. Because to fully grasp what went down at Château-Thierry, you can't just memorize a list of dates or troop movements. It's a raw story about human endurance under the most extreme pressure imaginable.
Yeah, I want you to just picture this for a second. Put yourself in these boots. Imagine being a brand new soldier. You're barely out of training, maybe still trying to figure out how your gear sits on your shoulders, and suddenly you're thrown right into the absolute meat grinder of World War I. Your very first real test isn't a skirmish. You're tasked with stopping a massive, battle-hardened German army. And this army isn't threatening some distant, unnamed field. They are less than 50 miles from Paris. The stakes could not possibly be higher.
They really couldn't.
Yeah.
That's the sheer gravity of the situation that makes this deep dive so rewarding for you as a learner. To understand the panic setting in among the Allies, we have to look past the trenches of France for a moment. We have to look at the massive global shifts that force these fresh American troops onto that specific line at that specific time.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to look at the desperate strategic background that forced this confrontation, the explosive, chaotic tactical actions at the Marne River bridges, the incredibly innovative counteroffensive that followed, and finally the lasting legacy this battle left behind in stone, in literature, and in global memory.
What's fascinating here is that the global chessboard in early 1918 was looking incredibly grim for the Allies. You really have to view this through the lens of the Russian Revolution.
Yeah.
It's easy to look at the revolution as its own separate chapter of history, but its immediate ripple effect was putting Paris directly in the crosshairs.
Because the revolution effectively neutralized the Eastern Front, right? The fighting there just stops.
Precisely. That massive geopolitical earthquake freed up a staggering amount of German manpower. They no longer had to fight a two-front war. General Ludendorff, the German commander, saw a very specific, very narrow window of opportunity.
And he took it.
Oh, absolutely. He took all those veteran battle-hardened troops from the east, moved them west, and consolidated them for what was called Operation Michael. His strategy wasn't just to gain a few yards of mud. The goal was to hit the Allies with such overwhelming concentrated force that their lines would physically split in two before the Americans could fully mobilize.
And reading through the source material, you realize just how terrifyingly effective this was at first. The Germans weren't using the old methods. The article mentions they were using stormtrooper infiltration tactics, which sounds intense, but what does that actually look like on the ground?
It was a radical departure from what we usually picture when we think of World War I. Instead of sending massive, slow waves of men over the top to just grind against heavily fortified front lines.
Which usually just resulted in massive casualties.
Exactly. Instead of that, the Germans deployed small, highly trained, fast-moving units. These stormtroopers would actively bypass the enemy's strong points. They'd slip through the gaps, cause chaos in the rear-cut communication lines, and leave the heavy strong points isolated for the regular infantry to mop up later.
Wow, so that explains the speed of their advance. They gained something like 40 miles of territory, which in the context of World War I trench warfare is practically light speed.
It's unheard of.
They pushed incredibly hard, eventually launching Operation Blucher. That operation took the French Sixth Army completely by surprise at the Chemin des Dames, which was supposed to be this highly defensible ridge, and suddenly the Germans are at the Marne River. Again, under 50 miles from Paris. You can practically hear the artillery from the city.
The momentum was terrifying. And this crisis brings us to a major, very tense conflict happening behind the Allied lines. The Americans were finally arriving in France in meaningful numbers, but American General John J. Pershing had a deeply entrenched philosophy.
Oh yeah, the source goes into this.
From the moment his troops stepped off the boats, he flat out refused to hand over his divisions to British or French commanders to be used as replacements.
He wanted an independent American army, right? He didn't want his guys just plugged into the holes of a depleted French line.
Right. He was entirely stubborn about keeping the American Expeditionary Forces, the AEF, together as one unified entity. It was about national prestige, but it was also about maintaining cohesive command structures. He didn't want American soldiers taking orders from foreign officers who might view them as expendable shock troops.
But there is a really wild exception to Pershing's rule in our source, and it paints such a complex picture of the era. While Pershing was insisting on keeping American troops strictly under American command, the regular Army Buffalo Soldiers, the African-American troops of the 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions, fought exclusively under French command for the entire duration of the war.
It's a critical dynamic to understand. The source notes these were segregated troops led mainly by white officers at the top, but heavily reliant on experienced black non-commissioned officers, the NCOs, and the French welcomed them.
Right, because they needed the men.
And because the French military structure didn't have the same rigid, institutionalized racial segregation that the American military insisted upon at the time.
And the article also points out that those experienced black NCOs were frequently loaned out or provided to other segregated volunteer units that did remain under American command, like the 317th Engineer Battalion.
It really highlights how even within the strict rigidities of the military and the intense segregation of the early 20th century, the actual flow of expertise in battlefield command was highly complex. The military needed that expertise even if it conflicted with their domestic social policies.
It's just a fascinating snapshot of the time. But getting back to the front line, the German onslaught is getting so severe, the threat to Paris is so immediate that Pershing finally hits his breaking point. The strategic reality on the ground basically forces him to compromise.
He had no choice. Marshal Ferdinand Foch, who was the newly appointed Allied Generalissimo, couldn't secure British assistance to plug the gap. Pershing's own chief of operations, Colonel Fox Connor, looked at the maps and recognized the sheer gravity of the crisis. If they didn't bend the rules, Paris would fall.
So Pershing finally relents. He sends a portion of his army to assist the French in blocking the advance. He sends the 3rd Division and the completely green 2nd U.S. Division, which actually included Marine Corps units, right into the fire. Which brings us to one of the most cinematic, chaotic moments of the entire war.
We're looking at May 31st, 1918. The U.S. 3rd Division and the French 10th Colonial Division rendezvous at the Marne River. Their explicit do-or-die job is to defend the bridges leading into the town of Château-Thierry. If the Germans cross those bridges in force, the road to Paris is wide open.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Americans set up their heavy machine guns on the south bank of the river to provide covering fire for the French, who were slowly retreating from the north bank. But there's an American unit led by Lieutenant John Bissell that ends up in a terrifying position.
Oh, this part is just incredible.
They are situated north of the secondary bridge, meaning they're essentially trapped on the wrong side of the river as the German army is advancing right into Château-Thierry.
The tactical chaos of this specific moment is just unbelievable. The French spend the entire night of May 31st frantically rigging these bridges with heavy explosives in the pitch dark. Early the next morning, June 1st, the Germans push heavily into the town. The French are forced back to the main bridge, desperately defending it, relying entirely on that American machine gun fire from the south bank to keep the Germans pinned down.
And then the French blow up the main bridge. They have to. It's the only way to stop the German advance. But Lieutenant Bissell's group is still stuck on the north side.
Exactly. Put yourself in Bissell's boots for a second. You're trying to figure a way out. The main bridge is gone. You and your men have to work your way back to the secondary bridge.
While taking fire.
Yes, you're taking heavy fire from the advancing Germans behind you, but you're also trying to navigate through a literal wall of friendly American machine gun fire coming from your own guys on the south bank who are just shooting at anything moving on the north side. The sheer grit that takes is unimaginable.
And miraculously, they make it across that secondary bridge. Yeah. And not just that they actually make it across, dragging a group of German prisoners they managed to capture during the retreat. It sounds like a Hollywood script, but it's right there in the historical record.
It is. I mean, what stands out to you when you hear that gritty, localized, desperate defense of those bridges effectively stalled Ludendorff's massive advance. By June the Germans are unleashing heavy artillery and sniper fire across the river, trying to force a crossing at the remaining damaged spans.
Yeah.
But the Allied defense holds firm.
Right. The casualties for the attacking Germans rise so high so fast that they are finally forced to call off the assault.
Exactly.
It's an incredible defensive stand. They held the door closed, but they didn't just sit there. A month later, the entire narrative shifts. On July 1st, the combined French and American forces under the direction of Marshal Foch launch a massive counter-assault. We're talking about an attack across a 25-mile-wide front between Fontenoy and Château-Thierry.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this July 1st counterattack represents a massive evolution in World War I tactics. For years, the standard operating procedure was to unleash a massive days-long preparatory artillery bombardment before sending infantry over the top.
To obliterate the enemy trenches.
That was the idea, but the reality was it just served as a giant, deafening alarm bell. It told the enemy exactly where and when the attack was coming, allowing them to pull their troops back and set up machine gun nests to mow down the advancing infantry.
Right, it ruined any chance of a surprise attack. But our source points out that for this July offensive, they managed to keep their plans a total secret. So instead of a 3-day warning bombardment, they used a synchronized rolling barrage. Can you explain how that actually worked on the ground?
A rolling barrage requires incredible mathematical precision and communication, which was incredibly difficult in 1918. The artillery fires a massive wall of shells that lands just 100 yards or so ahead of your own advancing infantry. As the infantry walks forward, the artillery increases their range, slightly moving that wall of explosions forward. It provides a moving shield of shrapnel and dust, forcing the enemy to keep their heads down in their bunkers until the advancing troops are literally right on top of them.
So these American doughboys and Marines went over the top completely by surprise, and it paid off immediately. The 3rd Brigade of the 2nd U.S. Division actually led the attack on the highly strategic town of Vaux.
What's wild about this counterattack is that individual American units didn't even wait for orders once the chaos started. The source notes they exercised such intense personal initiative that they just kept fighting and advancing even when they found themselves nominally behind enemy lines. They bypassed strong points, took out machine gun nests on the fly, and kept pushing.
And by the end of the day, Vaux was entirely in American hands.
The effectiveness of this combined operation, integrating the French command with American aggression, using new tactics like the rolling barrage, is starkly reflected in the numbers. The article gives us the exact toll. 1908 Allied casualties compared to 328 German casualties.
That is a massive difference.
They inflicted nearly 3 times the losses they took against a highly experienced, entrenched enemy. It was a massive psychological blow to the German high command.
So what does this all mean? How do we interact with a battle like this today? It's really easy for these events to just fade into the black and white photos of textbooks, but the physical footprint of Château-Thierry is still remarkably present in our world.
It's very present. If you go just 2 miles west of the town in France, you'll find the massive Château-Thierry monument on Hill 204. It was designed by the architect Paul P. Cret from Philadelphia and constructed by the American Battle Monuments Commission.
And it's huge.
It is. And the explicit purpose of that towering monument isn't just to commemorate the tactical victory. It's physically designed to represent the deep friendship and the literal battlefield cooperation of the French and American forces.
And you don't even have to fly to France to find a piece of this battle. This is one of those historical artifacts that just blows my mind. If you go to New York City, right in front of the Bronx County Courthouse, there is a monument that was presented by the American Legion in 1940. It's not a replica. It's an actual massive keystone salvaged from an arch of the old bridge at Château-Thierry, the very bridge we were just talking about.
That's incredible.
The inscription notes it was gloriously and successfully defended by American troops, just sitting there integrated into the Bronx.
It's a very visceral, physical connection to the past. But while we look at these stone monuments, we also have to remember the deeply human toll, which extended far beyond the borders of France and America. The text highlights a soldier named Private Tomas Mateo Claudio. He served with the U.S. Army in the American Expeditionary Forces, and he has the solemn distinction of being the first Filipino to die in World War I. He fell at Château-Thierry on June 29, 1918.
And his sacrifice didn't go unnoticed. The Tomas Claudio Memorial College in Marne River in the Philippines was founded in 1950 and named directly in his honor. It really drives home how a single localized battle at a river crossing in France ripped outward and touched lives across the entire globe.
Absolutely. And beyond the physical monuments and memorials, the battle left a profound cultural footprint. It seeped deeply into the literature and theater of the 20th century. For instance, Ken Follett's 2010 historical novel, Fall of Giants, devotes a very intense chapter to it. He depicts the fighting from both the German and the American perspectives.
Right.
He really emphasizes that for the freshly arrived Americans, this was their ultimate baptism of fire. They were green, they were scared, yet they stood their ground against veterans who had been fighting for 4 years.
There's also a 1937 play by Walter Charles Roberts called Red Harvest, which the Wikipedia article references. What makes this place so gripping is that it isn't a fictionalized account of generals moving map pins. It's based directly on the actual diary of an American Red Cross nurse who was deployed at the battle. It's set at the American Red Cross Hospital 111 in Château-Thierry.
Which grounds all those tactical movements and rolling barrages we just discussed right back into the visceral, bloody reality of the medical tents. The play details the harrowing conditions the hospital staff faced enduring constant air raids and deafening shell fire while trying to perform surgeries.
Unbelievable stress.
They were dealing with incredibly difficult, catastrophic injuries right on the ragged edge of the battlefield. It's a very sobering reminder of the true cost of that 40-mile German advance.
It really is. So to pull all of these threads together for you, we started with a group of completely untested American troops. They were thrown into a desperate global crisis caused by massive geopolitical shifts thousands of miles away in Russia. But by partnering closely with their French allies, holding a rigged bridge under impossible circumstances, and adapting to entirely new offensive tactics, they helped turn the tide of a massive global conflict.
And that is the ultimate. So, what for you, the learner? The value of studying a battle like Château-Thierry isn't just about memorizing military history or unit numbers. It's a masterclass in human behavior. It's about how showing up, collaborating across immense cultural and linguistic differences.
Like the French and the Americans having to coordinate a bridge demolition while actively under fire.
Exactly, and adapting your methods under extreme pressure can literally change the trajectory of history.
It's a perfect example of why digging into these sources is so constantly rewarding. But before we wrap this up, there is one last, almost meta detail from this Wikipedia article that we have to talk about because it really caught my eye.
Yes, this raises an important question. If you pull up the very top of the Wikipedia article we used as our source today, right under the title, there is a prominent flagged warning banner. It states plainly that the article appears to contradict itself on the date of the battle. In some sections, it lists the battle as taking place in late May and early June. In other sections detailing the counteroffensive, it specifically cites July 1st.
It's literally right there in the text, a permanent disclaimer.
It is, and it challenges you to ponder something incredibly profound about how we consume information. Think about it. If an event as massive, as meticulously documented by multiple nations, and as monument-filled as the Battle of Château-Thierry can still have murky, contradictory timelines on a major encyclopedic platform a full century later.
How much of the history we accept as absolute rigid fact is actually shaped by the chaotic, disorganized, and deeply subjective fog of war? That is exactly what we want you to mull over today as you go about your week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Battle of Château-Thierry. We hope it gave you some surprising facts, a few intense stories to share, and a brand new perspective on how history is made and remembered. Keep questioning what you read and keep learning.